Good evening. Welcome to the Oregon City Council regular meeting for October 9th, 2023. The time now is 7:02, and we will open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Rawson, will you take a roll call of council members present?
Mr. Davish?
Here.
Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Paula?
Here.
Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Wallenzak?
Here.
Mr. Zale?
Here. Also present at tonight's meeting are Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator Joel Major, Clerk of Council Cassie Rolson, Law Director Melissa Pecora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, and Finance Director Nick Roman. Council, we need to approve the meeting minutes from the September 25th, 2023 regular meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move for passage of the minutes of our regular meeting on September 25th, 2023 as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the meeting minutes from September 25th, 2023 have been approved. Council, because we did not have a committee of the whole meeting last week, we need a motion to add items 129 through 135 to this week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing none, items 129 through 135 have been added to this week's agenda. The first item for discussion this evening is item 129, 2023, which is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Finance Director Nick Roman. And I will defer to Mr. Roman on item 129.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is to authorize a renewal of our liability insurance. The premium amount for the year of October 15th, 2023 through October 14th of 2024 is $255,549, which is an increase of about $23,000. Majority of that is from us finalizing the fire station, which caused it to go up about $10,000. So that was added. The overall increase was 3.5%, which added about $8,000. And then there's a couple miscellaneous things such as the police car or vehicles that have a higher replacement cost now. So that increased it a little bit as well. Another thing I wanted to point out is that our cybersecurity coverage was very expensive through the Ohio plan. So they went out to other vendors and they were able to find one for about half the price with the same coverage, and that's through Tokyo Marine. Our agent Lori Manning was more than happy suggesting them as cybersecurity coverage. Is there any questions?
Roman. I did see we had that break on that, but it's half.
Yep,
Wow, that's a lot of money.
it really is.
Thank you. Thank you. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 129, 2023? Hearing none, I will assign item 129, 2023 as ordinance 129, 2023 and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
Authorizing the renewal of the Ohio Plan Insurance pool coverage and the replacement of cyber coverage through Tokyo Marine as administered by Highland Administrative Services LLC, 811 Madison Avenue, Toledo, Ohio, for property and liability insurance coverage, general liability, employer's liability, employee benefits liability, law enforcement officers liability, public officers or public officials liability, automotive or automobile property, special property, electronic equipment / media, crime, boiler and machinery, and excess liability insurance in an initial premium amount of $255,549.25 and premium adjustments for additions and delineations and declaring emergency.
Mr. President,
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Wallenczak.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 129, of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mr. Rawls, will you take a roll call vote of council, please, on ordinance 129?
Mr. Wallensack,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 129, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item, also presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Finance Director Nick Roman, is item 130, 2023. And I will once again defer to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is to authorize us to make supplemental appropriations as well as inter and intra-fund transfers. Majority of these appropriations are just to get the accounts up to the black. The main one is for IT. This is due to JT Schmidt's increase in pay, as well as us placing him strictly in IT. Originally, we had him budgeted 50% in building and zoning, 50% in IT. Now that he's fully in IT, we had to add quite a bit to that account to make it in full. Another big one is for building and zoning. There's 2 nuisance abatements on 2 different properties that will cost about 21,000, but we will be reimbursed for those. So we just had to add that into the budget to originally pay for them. For our fire billing with our new admin service with Acumed, they actually charge us an admin fee rather than them taking out the admin fee, then sending us the money. So we had to appropriate money for the admin fees, which we're estimating at about 18,000. We're trying to cover ourselves through the rest of the year. A couple of these other ones, I don't know if you may go over them, but there's some auditor fees in here, as well as just a couple items that went a little bit over what we budgeted and had to cover them. So if there's any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, are there any questions or comments regarding item 130, 2023?
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak.
I do, Nick. My apology for not reaching out to you sooner just to get a little clarification, but I've got 2 questions as we look through this. The building and zoning for the nuisance abatements, what type of services did we render in those?
So this is for asbestos abatement and demolition. That's all I really know. Joel, you may be able to help out on this one. Do you know a little bit about,
There,
more about it than I do?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, and members of council. This is through the land bank, and there are 2 homes where asbestos abatement has taken place or is taking place with 2 demolitions. So we're working with the land bank now on the status of the properties and taking acquisition.
Thank you, Mr. Major.
Sure, good.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Second question I had on that, in the interfund transfers, the first item that's listed there at $11,410, I see the note on there of new press box power relocation. Transfer 260 solid waste from Fund 101.
Yeah,
Is
so
that
this,
what we're paying that out of?
well, so it was actually originally budgeted in the rec department's CIP. And so they were gonna get a golf cart, and apparently they ran into an issue when relocating the electrical, and so they needed some additional funds. So they said they could forego the golf cart for this year. So it's actually coming out of the rec department, but that 101, 6,000 is our transfer account out of 101. So we had to move the money into there in order to move it over to
Oh,
260.
so that's just a transitional account ultimately arriving
Correct.
into the rec department?
Yep, correct.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 130, 2023 as ordinance 130, 2023, and ask Ms. Rolson to read it into the record.
Authorizing and directing the finance director to make supplemental appropriations and interfund and intra-fund transfers on an as-needed basis for fiscal year 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallensack.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 130 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Mr. Rawls, will you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mr. Wallensack,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, Council. Ordinance 130, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item for discussion is item 131, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman. And I will defer to Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman, do you want to include 132 in your discussion on
I
this?
could, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Roman.
Yep, thank you. And so item 131 is the Lucas County Active Transportation Plan. This is a plan that was developed by the Toledo Lucas County Health Department and Live Well Greater Toledo organization. It is a steering committee made of several Lucas County community representatives, transportation engineers, and health organizations. The plan the purpose of the plan is really just to improve all ways that people can get around without using a motorized vehicle, walking, biking, and also includes people who have to use a wheelchair or an electric scooter. And the plan examines all Lucas County communities' infrastructure, recommending various solutions to improve movement, as well as looking at ways to improve safety through education. A lot of the things that are recommended and the best management practices throughout the document are things that we've always had in our Safe Routes to School plan. It's actually was done in 2008. We're actually redoing that plan now with a grant through ODOT, but it does take a broad look at all the communities in Lucas County. The executive summary is attached in the Exhibit A. It is a big document. We did provide links out on the city's Facebook page. A lot of the input that was collected for this study was done in 2021. We actually had surveys out through our Economic Development Foundation and the city website looking for people to fill out the surveys. They had 3% of the city's population fill it out. Doesn't seem like a lot, but 600 people is actually pretty decent for a survey. And a lot of that input was incorporated into this plan. A lot of it looks at the more urban areas, Navarre Avenue, Wheeling Street, just trying to get pedestrians out of the road, separated from the roadway. It makes recommendations for rural roads to have more of a paved berm in lieu of a bike path, which is something that should be considered in roadway programs. And just connectivity on all our sidewalks, there's, they don't get into each neighborhood, they stay on the main roads, but the overall theme is to provide connectivity in between destinations. So, and I guess really I'll go into the item 132 is the Northwood Oregon plan, and you're aware of this. We actually hired Manikin Smith for this work. It was done in July. We partnered with Northwood, paid half of the cost, but it was looking at each other's bikeway facility and putting it all together in a common plan. And I think when you look at our map that you have on the table here, we, just like Oregon, we try to connect all of our main destination points and then try to branch from there. Well, we were able to get all of Northwood's destination points to get it all on the same map and try to look at the best ways to connect. And nothing in these two plans are written in stone. A lot of it is just giving recommendations and things to consider when looking at these facilities. But I can tell you overall, when you do apply for grant applications for these things, having a resolution that supports a plan goes a long way. It does help you score better on these grant applications. I have nothing in the works right now. We did very well on our grant application for the Oregon Town Center bike path. And I believe we will get grant funding for that. But we did write these resolutions as non-emergencies. Again, if there's more time to look at it or the plans, and if you want to simply call and ask questions, we're happy to do that. So, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Yeah, I looked at this and I went through all of that, and I saw it kind of considered it more like a wish list.
Yes.
Something for us to shoot for
Yep.
in the future, I guess.
Yes.
And I guess I don't know how we would prioritize what to do first.
Yep.
But, with that, do we anticipate county input and help from the county regarding, I'm sure the county is going to want to get involved with doing business. Well, this is going to be a countywide thing to some extent, I think.
Yeah, and I think each community that was involved with this is going to use this plan for whatever funding they're looking for. And it is a network of support as well. But no, I think there's nothing in here that binds us to a county project or anything like that, or vice versa. It is just having professionals take a good look at your community to see what you could do to improve it. Yeah, there's nothing written in stone. You're right. A good way of labeling this as a wish list is a good way to look at it, because that's what it is. Even the Northwood Oregon plan, you know, I have my ideas of what I think would be the best route. But if you ask somebody just to fill out a survey, maybe somebody who all they do is walk and they're just looking at having difficulties in getting from A to B, and they filled out that survey to give their input, which is good. And that's what that plan was for. And it's something to consider their input as well as the professionals on where we should make an improvement. So.
Yeah, I know I discussed with you very briefly regarding the Northwood, Oregon bike plan. I was a little concerned about how excited they were to get involved with this. And of course, now you just said they're willing to pay half of this.
Well, we've already done the plan, and we've already funded it, and the plan is done. Okay, and that entire plan is in this exhibit. Okay, so that's the end product. But anything in the future that we do, it would be on Northwood to cover the costs of work in Northwood, just like Oregon would include the work in Oregon. But as to how we give a priority and what we do first, the plan kind of guides that. And I think it's interesting, like Lemoyne does have sidewalks on it in Northwood. They did that with the Safe Routes to School grant. When that gets you up to Curtis Road, that's not too far from the YMCA and our dog park. And that's why I kept thinking, boy, that'd be a great connection piece there. And then going from Lemoyne due east to what was the old Woodville Mall, which is now their enclave, you don't need a bike path on that road. You could easily, it's not as heavily traveled with vehicles, and it's a great straight path, and it starts to create this loop. When you look at our older bikeway plan on what we had in the past, a lot of our bike facilities were north of Navarre. They weren't even south of Navarre. We just started to branch out to head south.
Right.
And I think if you're going to go even further, you do need to look at the community next door and see what makes sense. And when you don't know what their destinations are or what they're thinking, that's the beauty to these plans. So it does give it some weight. And again, if we apply for grant funding, there'd still be a split in cost shares. Likely they would cover their costs, we would cover our costs, but there's a good chance we both would score well by mentioning you have this plan and having a resolution where you have council supporting it.
So you'd say Northwood is somewhat excited about this, and
Yeah,
and they do want to get involved in such a thing.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's true.
thank you, Mr. Roman.
Mr.
Councilman,
President,
Mr. Wallenczak.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Roman, looking towards 2024, 2025, do we have any plans to maybe finish the connection from Navarre Avenue to Star Avenue to give the people on Brown to Pickle
Yes.
the connection to the parks?
Yeah, Mr. President, Mr. Wallenczak, yeah, that was in our budget this year for right away, and we have not acquired that right away yet. But it was, if next year we get that right away, it would be in next year's budget for that piece.
Okay.
All right, and then also, I believe we did score well with our bike path that'll go in front of the Dairy Depot and
Yep.
down Dustin Road. So I think that'll happen as well
Okay.
next year.
I know that we had gentlemen here that spoke with us asking for kind of a timeline of when the people south of Navarre Avenue are going to be able to connect
Yeah.
into the bike path to go all the way out to the state park. And
Yeah.
I know he would be excited about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Agree. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Council, any other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake?
thank you. Mr. Roman, I know you mentioned motorized bicycles. I'm not a real big biker. I'm more of a walker. What defines like electric bicycle compared to like a moped?
Yeah, in theory, our bike plan, and just so you know, Mr. President, Mr. Drake, our plans do not allow motorized vehicles on our bike paths. We have signs that say that. But a wheelchair or, electric scooter is viewed as a support for a pedestrian, and that would be allowed, okay, in general. So, yeah, I don't know in terms of police if they would want to chime in on that, but normally obviously we didn't want a car traveling down a bike path. You didn't want a motorcycle or anything heavy, and certainly golf carts weren't allowed as well. But certainly personal support, wheelchair, electric wheelchairs are certainly allowed.
Okay, and you did mention, they're kind of shooting for, roads with a wider berm.
Yeah.
Like Star Avenue has, a specific bike path. Would there be any roads where, say like a Wynn Road, where you would have to designate to make it wider because it's pretty narrow?
Yeah, and it's a question, I can tell you of just right away sometimes, Star Avenue, as much as the bike lanes are nice. What age did you want, people to travel that? A younger kid, that's why we did well with the Safe Routes to School grant, because we were able to put sidewalks, even though there were bike lanes there. But when you get into the more rural areas, or even the industrial areas, I think, it just depends on what you do. But what the study is saying is, well, you don't necessarily need to dedicate a 5-foot wide path. Just by going an extra couple feet, it will make someone feel comfortable. A lot of bicyclists are very comfortable on just traveling the road, let alone have an extra couple feet. So that's what they're recommending. It's more for our rural roads to have just an extra wide, but you also need right of way sometimes to do that. So that's as much as it's a wish list, the one thing that I have to deal with is right away, and it does get tough.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Just one comment, having some familiarity with electric bikes. Most of them are just mostly an electric assist. I wouldn't know if we
Yeah.
prohibit them from being on a bike path.
Yeah, that's correct.
They're not really used like that, although
That's
they can go pretty fast, but,
That's correct.
but,
It's a different world now.
yeah, and I know you and I've had this discussion similar to what Mr. Drake brought up. And I had some concerns about this early on when we were connecting Brown Road.
Okay, yeah.
And, we talked about, I don't like the idea of bicycles being on Brown Road unless we did widen that, because
Yep.
I know it's 35 miles an hour, but it's never been 35 miles an hour.
And I can tell you, Brown Road has had me thinking on just how to loop it with Northwood as well. And even sometimes when you can't necessarily widen road, you could stripe it more narrow. And that is used to help reduce speeds.
Yeah, it would,
But
yeah.
you can only do it so much, but it does help, and it does give you a little bit more of a wider path. But I definitely think the connection to Brown Road should go further south through Edison's easements and connect to Trails End Park. That is shown on this map here with Northwood. And I think that would be a nice connection piece. One other avenue was Brown to Wynn, and looking at Wynn in some way or another, like Mr. Drake mentioned, whether you make Wynn wider. A lot of it is undetermined as to what would be the best facility, a bike lane or an off-road path. So it leaves that open, but definitely looks at what would be the best connection piece. So.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Yeah.
Council, any further questions on items 131 or 132?
Mr. President.
Ms. Hornier?
2 questions. One, just a comment going back to the electronic bikes. Those are getting to be extremely popular.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely popular. We bike all the time. I have them. That is going to continue to be a thing. It might be worth us doing some research into, has any other community tackled that yet? Have they started to work on that? And just overall, what is our view as a city team on those bikes being on the path? Because they're on those paths.
Yeah, it's hard not
Promise
to
you
see
they're on
them
the
as
paths
a-
today.
Yeah, for me at least, my opinion would be I don't see it much different than a regular bicycle. But yeah, we could do that.
Probably something worth us looking at as a group with that. My other question was, and this goes back to sometime back when the Safe Routes to School funding and program was first available, and I was kind of looking through some of the information that's in here. And it talks about limits. You can get X amount of dollars through the course of a project for infrastructure development, as well as some into planning, surfacing, different things of that nature. Are all these programs still available to us, or are there any that we've kind of tapped out in that aren't available to us because of projects we've done already?
Well, actually, we were the first project in the state of Ohio for safe
Mhm.
routes to school, and that was on Star Avenue. We have received we did receive a second project. We developed our own plan in 2008 for safe routes to school, and that plan is outdated at this point. So we applied for grant funding just to do the plan, and that is being done through ODOT, through a company called Tool Design. And we have met with them internally, with our police department and schools, and just started that kickoff meeting. But we'll use that plan for future funding, and we are not at our limit, and we're not capped. And the idea is to plan and then develop that into future projects.
Is one of the plans or discussions, Mr. President, for my one last question. We've talked a lot over the years about Seaman Road. Kids walking down Seaman Road, kids going to high school, coming from there, riding bikes out of it. Is
Yep.
there an opportunity in the safe route to schools where Seaman Road becomes an option in that corridor?
I think so. And you gotta remember, you're competing with other communities, and I think so. I know Siemens a perfect example of, making the road wider and striping it in so that until sidewalks come along or some other path, you give a place for people to walk, but that's still not the ideal. The ideal is to separate them from the road. And no, I do think it's actually with any mile radius of a school is a candidate for these dollars. And I think Coy School with Schmidlin and Warden area, I see kids crossing, I think just crossing the street on Pickle in front of Coy School. I see it every day. I see Kater, I see people walking their kids afraid of what could happen. And I like it because they're encouraging their kids to walk, which I like to see. But there needs to be sidewalks.
May I jump in here, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
Just
Walczak.
just a note on the Seaman Road, as Mr. Horniak said. I dropped my son off at school at Clay High School.
Yeah.
And this is how the kids walk down the street.
Yeah.
With their phone in front of
Oh.
them, not paying attention.
Don't,
On a bad day, when the sun hits you, you can't see the kids until you're right up on them, and I'm afraid that one of them's gonna get hit.
well, this brings up a very important point. And part of safe routes to school planning is education. It's teaching kids to look each way and to watch out for your surroundings. And that's very important to bring up. Okay, so.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Walczak. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 131, 2023 as ordinance 131, or I should say resolution 131, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
A resolution supporting the Lucas County Active Transportation Plan.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves,
I move for passage of resolution 131 of 2023.
thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Mr. Ralston, we take a roll call vote of council on ordinance one or resolution 131.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Walczak,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Resolution 131, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next, I will assign item 132, 2023 as resolution 132, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read in the record.
A resolution approving and supporting the Northwood Oregon Bike Plan.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves,
I move for passage of resolution 132 of 2023.
thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Ms. Ralston, would you take a roll call vote on ordinance or resolution 132?
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Walczak,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Resolution 132, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman. Item 133, and I will defer to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to purchase a part for a piece of equipment out of the wastewater treatment plant. It's what is called a gearbox for a centrifuge. Centrifuge is used to dewater, and out the wastewater plant, it's a dewater sludge, but if you ever watch your washing machine when it goes into rinse and it's going to drain, you'll see the barrel spinning, and that's what gets the water out of the clothing. But the centrifuge goes one step further. It has this auger on the inside that spins the opposite direction. The gearbox is what turns that. We have two centrifuges out for our sludge dewatering facility. One centrifuge can basically take care of the plant, but we do alternate the use of the two pieces of equipment. And this equipment is beyond its warranty. The centrifuge, the gearbox itself cannot be worked on in the field. It basically has to be sent to the manufacturer to be reconditioned. And that is a part of this purchase order for this equipment. We would get a 1-year warranty on the reconditioned gearbox. And that's all I have. I don't know if anything else. The cost breakdown is in Exhibit A, and be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Roman, how old is that current equipment right now?
Yeah, it's about 5 years old.
That's what I figured it was.
And just so you know, the other one is in perfect condition. It's just an odd thing, and I think it's just the nature of this equipment. The centrifuge is probably considered one of the best ways of dewatering. There's things called the belt filter presses that aren't as efficient. And before we did our barter exchange with Waste Management, you didn't know exactly where our sludge was going to go. If you were going to land apply it in the fields, in farm fields, the centrifuge was the way to go because it removed more water than the belt filter presses. But as lucky we were with Waste Management and doing the barter with them for their leachate, it didn't matter as much. But I think if the city ever wanted to go back to land application, you could, and you'd want a facility that could dewater with centrifuges. So,
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Walczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Roman, how long will this centrifuge be out of service while it's being reconditioned?
it is currently out of service right now, Mr. Walczak, and this will get repaired in the next couple months, but we can certainly get by until that's done.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Is
Mr.
there,
Walczak.
is there a backup in case something happens with our existing?
Well, you could bring in a belt filter press if you need it, and you can
On a
rent 'em.
rental basis?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walczak. Council, any other questions or comments regarding item 133?
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves?
thank you. Mr. Roman, I see that this is a reconditioned one. What would a new one cost?
I know it was definitely more in cost, but considering you get the 1-year warranty for this, I think we felt, and they almost encouraged us to go this route, to go the reconditioned route. So, and that's why we went. I can get that for you if you wish, Mr. Reeves, but this was the better alternative. I know that.
Thank you. That's fine.
Okay.
You don't need to.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Reeves. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 133, 2023 as ordinance 133, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Pelton Environmental Products, 8638 Cotter Street, Lewis Center, Ohio, for the purchase of a reconditioned centrifuge gearbox to be used by the wastewater treatment plant in the Department of Public Service in the amount not to exceed $66,966.01 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Davish.
I move for passage of ordinance 133 of 23 as an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Davish.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Ralston, will you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzak?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 133, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item for this evening's discussion is also presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien. This is item 134, and I will defer to you, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, this is the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation offers a firefighter exposure to environmental elements grant. So this grant is up to $15,000. It allows us to purchase new hoods and firefighter gloves. Our match for this grant would be $2,498.25.
Thank you, Chief. Did I see that this is over a 3-year period?
Yes,
And it'll
it
be
is.
$15,000 each year?
No, it's $15,000 one time.
Okay,
And then
I
we
wasn't
have to
clear on
do
that.
a
I was trying to-
report. We have to report for 3 years.
Okay, so in the end, it's gonna cost us 2,500,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
yep.
Council, any questions or comments on item 134?
Mr. President?
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chief, how long do the hoods and gloves last? If you're actively fighting a fire, is there a spec that you have to turn them over so often if they're exposed to the elements?
So, Mr. President, Mr. Wallenczak, actually the hoods, it depends on the amount of use that it is. So like regular turnout would be like your turnout coat and pants. Those are recommended replacement no matter what, every 10 years. Hoods are a lot longer or a lot shorter lifespan for that because you use them in the training atmosphere and also on the real structural firefighting. So it depends on the person and the application. There's always at the minimum of every 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Council, any other questions or comments on item 134? Hearing none, I will assign item 134, 2023 as ordinance 134, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and fire chief to apply for and to accept a firefighter exposure to environmental elements grant, or FEEG, from the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation to purchase structural firefighting gloves and protective firefighter hoods for the fire department and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 134 of 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenczak. Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Ralston, would you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 134, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Final item for this evening is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Police Chief Brandon Began, item 135, and I will defer to Chief Began.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is to authorize the purchase of one 2024 Ford F-150 police responder truck. We would use this vehicle for our property officers for special use, special conditions. It's not something that would be put right into the normal rotation of like road patrol like we do for the Ford Explorers. But it is a 4x4 capable vehicle that can be used for off-road use. It's pursuit rated. We would put a cage in the back and a computer, so it'd be fully functional. Our property officers we're gonna put a tonneau cover on the bed, but keep the bed open so they can transport property when they do the property destruction. We can pull the speed trailer. There's a lot of different uses for it. This is the first F-150 that we've purchased. So we'll see how it works. We think we'll get a lot of good years out of it because it won't be in the normal rotation. We think it'll be good for the department, and we can look into it further for other vehicles in the future if need be.
Thank you, Chief. I was kind of surprised to see we didn't have any local vendors respond to your bid at all. That kind of
Yeah,
surprised me.
Mr. President, we hand delivered to Bauman, Yark, and
Yeah.
Brandeis Ford locally. We spoke with, over at Bauman, the general manager over there. Their fleet guy did not have enough time to put everything together. It was kind of a short notice. And he expressed interest for the Ford Explorer Interceptors that we'll be putting in for once Ford opens that window up. But currently only the F-150 is open, and that's why it's such a quick turnaround. They open it up for a short period of time. We have to put the order in, and then they close out once they have their limit of vehicles. So we'll be doing the same thing with Ford Explorers, and we hope that Bauman or some of the other local Ford dealers will put in for those.
Thank you, Chief.
Mr. President?
Mr. Wallen's.
Thank you, Mr. President. Have we looked into how much it's going to cost to outfit the F-150s versus the Explorers? Is it cost similar to put the radios in and the lights and have them ready to go into service?
Mr. President, yes, it is going to be pretty similar. When we change out some of the Explorers, sometimes when you have a new model, the old stuff will fit into that. We'll have to outfit this with new stuff specific to the F-150, but it'll be similar to any other outfitting.
It's
of
not an
the
outrageous
vehicles.
expense to go to an F-150 versus a
Correct.
Explorer.
Correct, yeah, and in the bed, we put the tonneau cover on. We're not having pull-out boxes on this one.
Sure.
So we think it'll be within the limits of the other ones that we do as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Ms. Paulo. Thank you, Mr. Wallen's.
This is to Chief Began. So we have vehicles that we're waiting for, correct? Are we still waiting for vehicles? Because we had put some in and there was a wait on them.
Correct, yeah, so they switched up the purchasing last year. That's why it was kind of a mix-up. So normally we would budget, we'd put in for it, and it was this normal, you could do state bidding or local. They switched just last year to where it opens up to a certain period of time. They take so many orders and it closes.
Okay.
So not only did Ford do this, but also Dodge and all the other ones who do it, where it's open for just a short period of time and you have to quickly put the order in. And then it takes a while to get those vehicles in. So we wouldn't get this vehicle until probably mid to late next year. I'm guessing by the time it's fully outfitted.
Will we get the
And-
other vehicles before we get this one, or we'll get this one first?
Yeah, so we have the vehicles there. We still have some getting outfitted, finished the outfitting, correct? Or they are completely done now, but yeah,
Okay.
it took a while for them to get in from our order from last year. And then you have to get with Ebles and get the striping and all that. But those are confirmed to be all
Okay,
completed now.
okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Paulo. No, one quick question I want to ask you, Chief. I didn't ask you this before. Is this a club cab?
The four-door, I don't know if it's a club cab. It's the full-size four-door
It's the
option. I don't know if
full-size-
that's
full cab.
considered
It's the
club
full-
cab or,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
Mr. Began, for the 2019 Tahoes, for the trade-in, it says NA.
Correct, Mr. President. So Montrose Auto Group, who had the best bid on there, they did not give us an offer for the previous Tahoes. So that's something that we could look at trading in locally, or it could be something that we could put up onto Gov Deals. The Statewide Auto who put in their bid only offered us $1,500 per vehicle because the Chevy Tahoes, we were very disappointed in. They had a lot of issues. There's exhaust issues that leak into the vehicles. We probably would have been able to keep them longer if it wasn't for all of the issues that we started having 1,500 miles into driving these vehicles. So we've had nothing but problems with them. We use those as our supervisor vehicles, and we have a lot of older Tahoes that have lasted us a long time, but the 2019, I believe, models, we had problems from the start, and it was still under warranty at that time, but it was, I mean, issue after issue after issue with it. 1,500 miles I was driving it, and you couldn't get it into reverse, or you couldn't get it into drive at certain times. And we believe that it was computer issues with it. They could never replicate the problem. And then we just continued to have more problems with them.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any other questions regarding item 135? Hearing none, I will assign item 135, 2023 as ordinance 135, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Montrose Auto Group, 3960 Medina Road, Akron, Ohio, for the purchase of one 2024 Ford F-150 Police Responder WIP 150A to be used in the Oregon Police Division and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paul.
I move for passage of ordinance 135 of 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenzak. Thank you, Mr. Wallenzak. Ms. Ross, will you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes. Thank you, council. Ordinance 135, 2023 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Council, this completes our items for this evening, and we'll now move to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, you got correspondence that I've sent out regarding personnel issues. Start with the Recreation Department in a seasonal hire and ask council's concurrence in the appointment of Kevin Belo at 2 classification 4, step 3, $17.50 an hour, and the startup effective date is October 9th, 2023. Once again, ask council's concurrence in the hiring of Kevin Belo.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move to concur with the mayor, the additional seasonal recreational appointment of Kevin Belo.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, Mr. Mayor, council does approve of Kevin Belo.
I thank you. And next we'll go to the fire department and ask council's concurrence in the promotion of Dustin Eiler from firefighter 1, step 3 to firefighter 2, step 3, effective September 25th, 2023. Once again, ask council's concurrence in the promotion of Dustin Eiler.
Council.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I move to concur with the mayor's
Promotion.
this is promotion, thank you. Promotion of Dustin Eiler from firefighter 1 to pay step 3 to firefighter 2, pay step 3, effective September 25th, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, Mr. Mayor, council does approve of the promotion of Dustin Eiler.
And lastly, it is a retirement resignation, and that is of Todd Jadlowski. Lucky. Okay. And the retirement is effective October 4th, 2023. So I'd ask council's concurrence in expressing the wishes of Todd Jadlowski to retire.
Council.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I move to concur with the mayor's acceptance of the retirement of Todd Jadlowski, effective October 4th, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Council, are there any objections? Mr. Mayor, council does concur with accepting the retirement of Todd Jadlowski.
And I appreciate that. And with that, I would conclude my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Major.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Ms. Pepora.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Pepora. Mr. Roman.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Drake.
No report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Mr. Wallenzak.
No report this evening, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Wallenzak. Mr. Davish.
No report. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Davish. Ms. Pepora, or Ms. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to extend a reminder that Wednesday, October 11th is Fire Station 41's open house from 6 to 8 p.m. Also, I would like to set a safety committee meeting for Monday, October 23rd at 6 o'clock. This meeting is to discuss the future planning of the fire department.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Thanks.
Mr. Horniak, is that, you're done, Ms. Paula?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Horniak.
Nothing from my standing committee, but request I'd like to make of the administration and specifically Mr. Roman and possibly Steve Schrake from the building department. About a month ago, my daughters decided it was a good idea for us to all start a walking challenge. So I've been walking a lot more. The overpass on Seaman over the train tracks, we need to take a look at that fencing and the post connections to the concrete. Almost all of the fittings going over that are rusted through. So that would be a piece that I think that's worth looking at because it's not going to be much more until they just stop hanging on with where they're at. And now that I'm walking, I'm hearing questions from all kinds of walkers. And one of the questions are, on that same overpass to the south side of the road, which is typically, I'd say, the park side where people are walking over that overpass, it is a little bit, I'll say, pronounced height to the curb that's there. Was there ever any thought about putting some kind of divider or median between the walkway and the road?
Yeah, a lot of that project was designed through ODOT and meeting their standards. And I don't think with the height of the curb that warranted necessarily railing. Doesn't mean you can't do it. I just know at that time for design, it didn't. I know sections in Navarre have sidewalk or curbing just as high. And obviously you don't have it there as well. But I've always thought about that with bicycles being across that. I've always worried about that, quite honestly. And a lot of bicyclists just use the road as much as that sidewalk is there. Bicycles probably should be in the road. Walkers and joggers should be using the sidewalk. But yeah, we can always check. It doesn't hurt to look at that. Certainly we'll look at the fencing. Just so you know, everything in the right of way is really my area, and then everything outside the right of way would be Mr. Schrake, so just for future reference. So, but yeah, I can check with Mr. Schultz and take a look at that.
Because especially as you're going, I'll say from east to west, coming over the hill, the
Yeah.
road jogs just a little bit at that bottom.
Yeah.
And as you're coming down, that traffic's
Yeah,
coming right at you. It does get your attention as you're coming
Drive it
over.
8
so
times a
I've
day.
now
and
seen
it
that
always scares
myself.
me. Yeah, people on bikes especially. I just think they should be in the road, to be quite honest, but.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Roman. And I have nothing from my standing committee. We do have one person signed in to talk to council, Mr. Ashton Towns. Mr. Towns, are you satisfied with what I told you? Okay. Then I will seek a motion for adjournment.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Council, with any objections? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.